Hi, everyone. Welcome to EdTech Teacher Spring Renewal Webinar Series. We are hosting several webinars throughout this month and next month on a variety of EdTech topics. Today's session is on the importance of belonging, and we are so glad that you are here today. So a little bit about me. So I'm a classroom teacher or former classroom teacher. I served as department chair, technology coordinator. I've used EdTech a lot in my classroom. I started with 6 MacBooks and then moved into a one-to-one learning environment with iPads and Chromebooks. I'm a huge advocate for providing opportunities for student voice and choice in the learning process. My work with English language learners and special education students, including gifted learners, pushed me to identify ways that technology could support the varied learning needs of my students. I currently work as an instructor and trainer for EdTech Teacher. I also do research, and I'm an evaluator of EdTech products and programs. I've conducted professional development and published articles in the areas of history, social science, technology integration, SEL, and gifted learning. So a little bit about us at EdTech Teacher. Since 2008, we as a group have helped educators around the world solve challenges that they face in an ever-changing classroom environment. We are a group of current and former classroom teachers, and we've taken our passion for learning to support those who are on the front lines in education, our teacher friends and colleagues. We provide custom professional development for schools and districts who are looking for effective and innovative ways to use technology to support student learning outcomes. And we work with a variety of EdTech partners in the field, such as Google, Adobe, Digital Promise, Newsela, Formative, and Next Wave STEM. So here's a challenge that I'd like to talk about today. How do we address students who are disconnected from school and academics? As I mentioned in a previous webinar, we've all had students who have tuned out of our classes for a variety of reasons. They don't like the class. They don't like the people who are in the class. They don't like you. They don't find you or what you have to offer as interesting. They got into a fight with their best friend. They found out that they got an F on a test that they studied really hard for. Their parents are going through a divorce. Maybe they lost a loved one. Their electricity maybe is going to be shut off. They don't know where their next meal is going to come from. And I can go on and on. And now some of these are under your control, whereas others are not. So the question is, why does this matter? This matters because our needs dictate where we put our attention. Now, I love my days as an undergrad psych major because I learned to value what makes us unique, the importance of empathy, and the fact that we are complex human beings. And I bring this up because my psych studies became very real once I entered the classroom. What you see here is an image that depicts Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. So back in 1943, Maslow stated that individuals must satisfy their lower level deficit needs before they can progress to meet the higher level growth needs. And then later on, he clarified that the lower needs do not need to be 100% satisfied in order for the individual to be motivated to achieve higher level needs. So the most fundamental needs, the physiological ones, are situated at the bottom of the hierarchy, with the highest need, self-actualization, at the top. So consider the students who walk into your classroom every day. And remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because if your students do not have their most basic needs met, then they're not going to be in a good place or mindset to learn in your classroom. Now, I acknowledge that we as educators do not necessarily have the means to adequately address the physiological and safety needs of our students when they're out of our classroom. But while our schools can provide the hot breakfast and lunch as well as a sense of security on campus, there's always going to be things that are outside of our control. So the question is, what can we do with what we have? So a little bit about my backstory. So I worked at a Title I school. Actually, I worked at 2 different Title I schools. We had around 80% of students that had free and reduced lunch. They were English language learners. It was a high poverty district. We had gang violence and had a lot of students who were raised by single parents or grandparents. So this is why this issue is really important and resonates with me. So I believe that we can help our neediest students by looking at ways to support their psychological needs. So how can we foster relationship building with our students? And how can we instill a sense of belonging for them? And to be clear, they may not respond to our efforts if their most basic needs, the physiological and the safety needs, are not being met. So, the fact is we need to work with what we can control, and that is what our students experience on our campuses and in our classrooms. Now, this quote resonates with me because it's a reminder that feelings and emotions play a significant role in who we are, how we interact with others, and how we react in different types of situations, because we are feeling creatures that think. To me, it's always important to integrate what the research says with what I share during my presentations and workshops. So, since we're talking about feelings and thinking, I wanted to share what the research says about emotion and cognition. So, neuroscience research says that emotions and cognition are intricately connected. So, what a student feels impacts the amount of attention that they give or can give towards any topic, which directly influences learning. And emotions dictate our fight or flight response. Now, the fight or flight response is caused by stress, and then stress causes the production of cortisol. And then, so the frequent and high levels of cortisol can cause toxic stress, which can impair brain development and executive functioning skills, such as the ability to pay attention, to engage in problem solving, and also the working memory part of the brain. So, the prolonged stress may lead to impaired memory and information processing. And then downshifting occurs when the negative emotions cause us to process in our emotional center and lose focus on higher order thinking skills. So, how do we address this in our classroom? And I think that we can do that by providing strategies to help students develop resiliency. So, an example might be an orchid versus a dandelion, where an orchid is very sensitive to the environment, and then a dandelion really has the ability to handle pretty much anything. So we want to think of our students, kind of in both lights. I firmly believe, though, that we can help students develop resiliency by finding ways to provide a sense of belonging in our classrooms. So this idea of belonging really resonates with me because although I'm an introvert, I do feel a need to be connected with others, to be part of something that's a lot larger than myself. It's the authentic human connections that keep me from feeling lonely or isolated from the world. In the book Dancing with Discomfort, Dr. Bukowski wrote, "If the assumption that emotions and cognition are intertwined, then it should not be surprising that negative emotions such as confusion, struggle, worry, stress, self-doubt, and anxiety could crowd out the productive load required to learn and or perform a task." So let's go back to the research. The brain targeted teaching model by Dr. Hardiman is a framework that can help you create a classroom environment that can support the varied learning needs of all your students. So what you see on the screen here are the 6 brain targets. And in today's session, I will address brain targets 1 and 2. So brain target 1 is emotional climate. So according to the neuroscience research that Dr. Hardiman conducted, they found out that there's an intricate interaction between emotion and the cognitive brain systems. The information that first comes into the brain is processed in the emotional center before being processed in the cognitive center. So what happens in the emotional center of the brain can significantly impact the long-term memory and deep learning. So this is the stress, threats, and toxic environments that can have severe implications for classroom teachers. So the goal is to maximize strategies that can elicit positive emotions for those neediest kids in our classrooms. So the question is, how do we do that? The solution that I'm proposing today is a 5-step process: acknowledge, identify, empathize, build, and cultivate. So step 1 is to acknowledge that certain needs have to be met in order for learning to occur. And you can't control everything, but you can control some things. Step 2 is to identify students who may need additional emotional support structures. Step 3 is to hone your empathy skills and provide ways for your students to develop empathy for others as well. Step 4 is to build a warm classroom environment where students feel welcome. And step 5 is to cultivate opportunities for students to develop a sense of belonging in your classroom and with their peers, with the hope that they can carry this feeling with them when they leave your classroom. So starting back at step number 1, acknowledge. So students come to us with family and personal issues that are weighing heavily on their hearts and minds. Their basic needs or lack thereof are primarily out of our control, and they're going to have a difficult time concentrating or being motivated to learn your class. Their limbic system or their emotional center is on overload. So what can you do that's within your control to help make this student feel a sense of belonging? So this goes to steps 2 and 3, which is to identify and empathize with students who need additional support. So just know that acting out in class, or students, when they're acting out in class, it's not always due to what's going on in your class. So it's really important to get to know your students so that you can recognize why they might be struggling. And really simple things like this can be, just greeting kids at the door, greeting kids when they come in, doing the quick check-ins as you walk around the room, whether you're checking off homework or making sure they have the materials out. Watching for nonverbal cues and body language is a great way to be able to identify students who might be struggling at that moment. Letting students know that you do care about them through your own body language and your nonverbal cues, and then also just being real with your students. Now, one of the things that I did for many years, because I wanted to make sure that I understood, who my students were, I wanted to start building those bonds from day one, is that I provided a Tell Me About You survey at the very beginning of the school year. And that survey was actually quite long, probably had maybe 18 questions, but I asked students all sorts of things. I asked them to tell me about their strengths, their weaknesses. I asked them to share, things about their personal life, as long as they were comfortable with it. Do they have siblings? Who do they live with? All these things to get to know my students. And then I always left an open-ended question at the very end of it. And I asked students, to tell me anything that they wanted to tell me that I didn't already ask. And to me, that open-ended question provided a lot of insight into who my students were. And it also gave me an opportunity to find commonalities or maybe ways to engage them in some small talk, before class or after class. So you're once again, being able to identify these students that might already be struggling because they might reveal something like, my mom passed away last week, or, I live with my grandparents or something like that. And then from that, allows me as a teacher to begin to empathize with students and what they're going through. And, my life was not as hard as a lot of the students that, who walked in through my doors. But over the years, I've really learned to empathize with them. And it really just comes from a place of just listening and talking and letting students, build those feelings of comfort so that they do want to, share things with you. Now, considering the effects of emotions on learning, I just wanted to just put up this question here. So what practices and policies should be considered to ensure that the classroom environment serves as a protective factor and not a contributing factor for stress? So we're going back to the emotional climate of the classroom itself, and what can you do to make sure that your students, are acknowledged and that they feel like a connection to who you are and what you're trying to teach them. So when considering practices that can foster, protective factors against stress, Castle's SEL competencies come to mind. So the 5-step solution that I propose aligns with Castle's SEL competencies, which aims to provide students with key skills such as self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So by intentionally integrating opportunities for students to acquire these important skills, we're enabling students to build resiliency, empowerment, and agency. And this is something that we can have an influence over within the 4 walls of our classroom. So this is a Castle framework that you see on the screen in front of you. And I'd like you to look at this as an ecosystem within which our students reside. So at the center are the 5 core social and emotional competencies. So they're broad yet interrelated, and they all support learning and environment. And with surrounding those are the 4 key settings where students live and grow. So we can have impact in the center of the circle. And that's really where I want us to just remain during the session today, is thinking about what kinds of things do we have direct control over when it comes to the students, because we can only control so much. Now, Rita Pierson did a TED Talk, I think it was in 2012, and it was titled "Every Kid Needs a Champion." And whenever I feel the need to be inspired, I do watch this TED Talk, because to me, it's just a wonderful way to think about someone who has such a passion for students. And she worked in an inner city school, and it was a tough area. And she asked herself a good question, which I think is something that we could all ask ourselves as well, which is, How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? So we're working with the emotional side and then also the cognitive side. And she gave her students a saying, which I think is just awesome. She would tell her students to basically repeat after her. So I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I'm powerful. I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. So, everyone desires for someone to believe in them, and students do want to feel like they belong to something. So, to me, again, this is something that we can certainly do for the students who walk through our doors every single day. So step number 4 for the solution that I'm proposing today is to build a classroom culture. So I just want you to think about, how do your students feel when they walk into your classroom? So what is your classroom culture like? And how do you foster a sense of belonging for your students? And once again, just going to my backstory. So I taught I taught 7th grade at a middle school, and our students came from 7 different elementary schools. So 7th grade in and of itself was a really difficult transition. But when you have students who are coming from a lot of schools and they may only know a handful of kids in your class, I mean, that just makes the transition, even more scary than it normally would be. So this goes to brain target 2 from Hardeman's research, which is the physical climate of your classroom. So neuroscience research does say that 90% of what goes into our brain, is all about the incoming visual stimuli. So the brain is actively scanning the environment for the stimuli itself. And it's strongly influenced by novelty. So things like the sound, the lighting, the sense of things, all those affect learning. And so the goal here would be to provide novelty, order, and beauty in your classroom. So when it comes to setting the tone, the things that I'd like you to think about is what's the physical layout of your room? So are the desks spread far apart? Are they grouped together? What's the layout itself? And then think about the lighting. Is it the harsh fluorescent lights, or are you able to, dim those just a little bit so it's not so stark when the students walk into your room? And then when you're thinking about the decor itself, what is the decorations? What does that look like in your classroom? Is it cluttered? Is it colorful? Is it welcoming? And then when it comes to the mood, those things to me are set by, the smells that are in your room and the sounds. So, do you have the opportunity to play music as kids are coming in or as they're working? I actually would use like the plugins for the kids. So when they came in and I had so many kids, I would say, oh my gosh, it smells so good in here. I mean, to me, that just set the tone for the learning for them. And the last thing I just wanted to share is you play a role in setting the tone for your classroom as well. And that goes to, are you greeting kids? What's your mindset like, what's your mood like? And I know that we can't be 100% on every single day, but that is just something to consider, that you also set the mood in your own classroom. So there's other ways to build community in your classroom besides just setting the tone and thinking about the layout. And this, connects to Castle's competency of self-awareness. I actually use 2 things with my students. So the name card art actually served a dual purpose. So the card itself, I just give kids a big index card. They could decorate the front with things that told me about them. And then on the back side, I had them answer a few questions, but it was also a place where I could just, keep information about who do they live with, what's their primary language, areas that they're struggling with. So it actually served 2 purposes, but it gave the students a chance to tell me a little bit more about them and an opportunity for me to potentially, build bonds or relationships with them. Another way that another thing I used to build community in the classroom was through Pixton. So Pixton is a free tool where students can create their own avatars. And what I would do is once the students created, their look, and it could have been anything, and I told them they don't have to make it look necessarily like them, so their personalities could shine. I would then, create a class picture, and then I would post that in Google Classroom as the banner or in our learning management system, because at the middle school level, we don't take class pictures. But this was one way where students could bond together, and you're seeing a class picture of one of my students. And then I also encourage the students to use their avatars and post them in our assignments online. So it was a way for them them to, add a little bit of their own personality to what we're doing. So once again, thinking about building relationships and a sense of belonging, those are the reasons why I use those two things. Now, another one is to cultivate relationships. So this is step 5. So one way to cultivate human connection is through relationship building and team building. And this does connect to the castle competencies of self-awareness, self-management, and relationship skills. So on the right, you're seeing a slide. The first page of the slide deck that I created for my students called A Kill of Hawks. Our school mascot were the Hawks. So I created the slide deck here. And this one actually came about during the pandemic because I had to figure out a way where students could get to know each other because it wasn't like they could turn and talk to someone. So within the slide deck, each student had their own slide and they were prompted to add in pictures or sayings or music, to give everyone just a little bit, some more information about their personalities, what matters to them. And it was a way for them to get to know their peers. Even when we came back to the physical classroom, when schools are allowed to open again, I still use this because to me, it was a great way for students to have a record of, who's in their classroom, and then they can, leave comments and hopefully develop relationship skills. Another one is just low tech. It was a scavenger hunt where I had kids walk around and try to find someone who played a musical instrument or who played soccer or who had 2 brothers who traveled out of the country. So it was just a way for students to communicate. I mean, they were definitely developing skills in their ability to, talk and build bonds with each other. And then once the scavenger hunts were all done, then I would do a whole class run and I would say, stand up if you're an only child. And then they could look around and see, okay, I'm not the only child. There's, other students who are the same as me. Or if I would ask, who's ever traveled, outside of the country, who has a passport, and the students would stand up. So, it was just a fun, easy way for students to start to build those bonds and a sense of belonging. So those were the 2 things I used with my students, and I felt like they actually made a difference in the classroom. Now, another way to create relationships through bonding experiences, I actually created a comment protocol, and it was called TAG, and I can't take credit for it. I found it somewhere online, but TAG stands for Tell, Ask, and Give. So whether they were doing it verbally or in a slide deck, I would have students, tell each other, one thing that they liked about what they were looking at. And this is really peer review. Ask that person a question to push them to think deeper, consider a different perspective, and then give them constructive feedback. And so this was something that we used over and over and over again. And it allowed students the opportunity, to develop an empowerment and agency, but also, relationships with their peers. The other one is a single point rubric where I would have students, not only reflect on their learning, but also solicit peer reviews. Because once again, I'm looking for ways that they could bond with each other. And then so they would evaluate each other's work before I even saw it. And then once they got their single point rubric back, they would make those revisions and then submit it to me, for a final grade. Now, I actually thought that this was a great way to bond with each other, but it was also a powerful tool because students could see what their peers were doing, and then they could decide, how much they wanted to revise of their own, project themselves. So it served, more than one purpose. Now, I do want to talk about how you can help be their champion. This goes back to Rita Pearson's TED Talk, because building trust and rapport with students goes a long way to fostering those strong relationships. And as Rita Pearson mentioned in her TED Talk, students won't learn from teachers that they don't like. And so it's you being their champion, you being their advocate, and supporting them in any way that you know how. And, it goes back to something very simple where you can just grade students, right? And honestly, you may be the only person that acknowledges them that day. And when I first heard this from another educator, I thought that's a really sad statement, but I think that in some cases it can be true. So I absolutely loved when I had front parking lot duty because I got to say good morning to so many kids, not just the ones that, walked through my classroom door. And, I actually thought it made a difference because the kids knew that I was acknowledging their presence. I would do daily check-ins with the kids. So polls, how are you doing? This one's a Google form you could see real quick. And that let me know who might be struggling that day. So I could give them maybe an extra support or extra attention during the class period. Another one is to just provide, basic school supplies. I mean, I worked at a Title I school, so we had tons of supplies, but don't let supplies be the barrier that, makes kids feel ashamed or isolated. If they need a pencil, give them a pencil, right? Or if they need paper, give them paper. I mean, it's those little things, right, that you can control within the classroom. They may not be able to get it outside the classroom, but you can give it to them while they're there. And I also, encourage you to, give brain breaks as needed, because sometimes kids are just overloaded, especially if you, teach all day and, by the time it comes to sixth period, everyone's tired. So maybe take a moment to just, let kids have a brain break for about 5 minutes, recharge, and then, go back to, whatever your lesson plan has. And then I also just think it's so important to acknowledge individual students' needs and also celebrate, right, their birthdays, or if they, played a soccer game, or any little thing that lets them know that they actually matter. So as we come to the end of this webinar, I just wanted to review the 5 solutions that I sincerely believe will help address the challenge of students who are feeling disconnected from school and academics. So this 5-step process, I think, will help you instill a sense of belonging for your students. And that's by acknowledging that certain needs have to be met before learning can occur. And though you can't control everything, you can control some things. I think it's important to identify those students who may need additional emotional support structures. I think you should try to hone your empathy skills and provide ways for your students to develop empathy for others as well. And then to build a warm classroom environment where students feel welcome. So you're looking at the physical classroom and then also the different kinds of things that they're doing in your classroom itself. And then to cultivate opportunities for students to develop a sense of belonging in your classroom and with their peers, with the hope that they can carry this feeling with them when they leave your classroom. And I just wanted to just end with, what a student feels impacts the amount of attention that they give or can give towards any topic that directly influences learning. Now, for the next steps, if you found value in what I shared today, please download the free guide that will be shared in the chat box. Consider attending any upcoming webinars or sign up for our summer learning pass. And then make sure you reach out to us at EdTech Teacher, because we are here to help. So this is the free webinar guide that will be put into the chat box, and then you can also see the bit.ly link on there. So it's just a little helpful hints of the things that I talked about today. And if you're looking for something to do this summer, consider the EdTech Teacher Summer Learning Pass. If you go to our website, you can sign up. And I just wanted to share that for $195, that's one pass gets you access to 13 courses for the rest of the calendar year. In fact, we have a new course with AI and ChatGPT that we're also offering as well. So these courses are live and on demand. And then you also, have direct access to the entire EdTech Teacher team. So you can reach out, email us. We're happy to jump on a video call with you. We're happy to support you in any way that we can. And there's even more learning opportunities at edtechteacher.org. So all you have to do is just check us out there, and we're happy to help you in any way that we can. All right, well, that comes to the end of our time together today. So I'm just going to leave it open for any questions, if there are any out there. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, just feel free to just email any of us at EdTech Teacher, and we're happy to answer them for you. Or, like I said, jump on a call to help you so that you can better help your students. Thank you so much for watching.